ahead and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Very good. Have a seat. Pull the microphone down to you, please.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
First thing I'd like you to do is to state your name and to spell your last name for Ms. Hodat.
Edward Kevin Lattyak, Lattyak.
And not long into your testimony, I think the jury will surmise that maybe you're not from here.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about your employment. What do you do for a living, sir?
I am the firearms section supervisor at the Hamilton County Coroner's Office Crime Laboratory.
And how long have you been a firearms examiner?
I've been a firearms and tool mark examiner for approximately 34 years.
And tell us what some of your duties at the Coroner's Crime Lab entail.
Basically, as the supervisor of the firearms and tool mark section, I'm going to be managing the section as well as conducting examinations on physical evidence that's submitted to the laboratory for analysis, and primarily that's going to be guns, ammunition, and ammunition components. In other words, fired bullets, discharged cartridge cases, and the guns themselves.
Right. And at this time, I'm about to go into your educational and occupational background, unless Mr. Matthews has some question about your qualifications.
I don't have any questions on the stipulation.
Very good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You've testified how many times in your career as an expert in firearms examination?
I would say at least 200 times in various states, U.S. federal courts, and also overseas.
And that includes here in the Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, if I could, let me direct your attention back. Sometime after July the 19th, 2015, did Cincinnati Police submit some items to you for examination in the shooting of Sam DuBose?
Yes.
Okay, let's go through first and identify what all they submitted to you. First is State's Exhibit number 23, and I think this actually probably didn't come from the Cincinnati Police, it came from another source, is that correct?
Yes, this would have been a fragment that was recovered during the autopsy, and it's my item number 1-18 or State's Exhibit number 23.
Okay, so the exhibits we're going to talk about, that actually did not come from Cincinnati Police. It came from the coroner, Dr. Karen Lohman.
That would be correct, yes.
And it was something that she recovered during the autopsy and turned over to you for further examination. Is that correct?
According to the records, yes, that would be correct.
And we'll set that down. We'll come back to that in a second. You were also submitted State's Exhibit 8-0, and I'll ask if you can identify that.
I can identify the package based on an orange sticker that I place on it, bearing the case number, item number, initials.
And what is that?
This would be the container for a Sig Sauer semi-automatic pistol.
In .40 caliber, is that correct?
That's correct.
And does it contain magazines, ammunition, that sort of thing?
Yes, it does.
That was all submitted to you together by Cincinnati Police?
That's correct.
And was it represented to you as the service weapon of University of Cincinnati Police Officer Ray Tenzing?
Yes.
I'll ask you to take a look at State's Exhibit 6C and ask if that was submitted to you by the Cincinnati Police Department.
Yes, it was, and it bears the item number, the case number, and other pertinent information. So it'd be a hat that was submitted for examination.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5D.
And State's Exhibit number 5D, which is my item number 12, which is a discharged .40 caliber cartridge case.
We'll talk to the jurors a little more in a second about your examination and we'll go through what that is. And finally, State's Exhibit 5E.
State's Exhibit number 5E would be the package for a bullet that was recovered. It was my item number 23, and it was a bullet that was submitted for examination.
All If we could, sir, let's start with 8.0. 8.0, that is what you've identified as a service weapon of Raymond Tensing, a Sig Sauer P320 handgun and .40 caliber. Can you tell us, sir, and if you want to remove it, this would be helpful, did you test fire this weapon?
Yes, this firearm was examined by myself and test fired a number of times.
And in your test fires, did the weapon operate the way it's supposed to?
Yes, it's a fairly new weapon, or a fairly new firearm, and it operated normally as intended by the manufacturer.
Could you, just for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury who might not be familiar with the operation of a semi-automatic firearm, could you explain to them how that handgun operates?
Certainly, and if I can, I'll take it
Please do. Make
out
sure
of
it's
the
safe,
package.
and then, if you would, show the jurors as you walk them through that.
Certainly. I am checking to make sure it's safe, retracting the slide, and the barrel chamber is empty. So,
Judge, to facilitate this so he's not confined in that witness box, can Mr. Lattyak come over and stand in front of the jury so they can all see?
Very good. Yes.
remove a magazine.
Take your time. And I apologize, Mr. Matthews, is there an objection to him standing closer to the jury? Thank you.
If you're trying to hold too much, you can use the corner of the table here also.
Certainly. So, in order to operate this handgun, this is a semi-automatic, .40 caliber pistol or handgun. And what we would do is we would actually load the ammunition into this container, which is a magazine. Some people call it a clip, but the correct terminology would be the magazine. And it's actually inserted, and this one's empty, but it would be inserted into the bottom of this gun, so it actually slides in and it snaps in. And to load the firearm, you would actually track the slide and let it go forward. And then when the magazine's inserted, it's going to pick up a cartridge out of the magazine and insert it into the barrel.
Can I stop you just a second? You said cartridge. For the layperson, are you talking about a bullet or a live round?
A live round of ammunition. Some people call it a bullet, but that's actually the component that's fired through the gun barrel. But for the sake of demonstration, yes, you put these bullets into the magazine, and again, you inserted the magazine into this area of the gun. It actually goes in and snaps in. Remove it. And then at that particular point, you're going to withdraw the slide, and you're going to bring it back and let it ride forward. It's going to pick up a cartridge and insert it into the magazine. Now this gun's ready to operate and ready to fire. And every time you want to shoot it, basically just press the trigger. And it's going to basically pull the trigger back and it's loaded. It's going to fire and it's going to cycle. In other words, the slide's going to retract every time you fire it, and it's going to take out that spent or discharged cartridge case. And that's a component of that ammunition. And it's basically going to throw it out of the gun. And the slide, it's going to throw it out on the rearward portion of the trap. And as the slide comes forward, it's going to pick up another cartridge. And so basically it's going to load itself, and so you can fire this particular gun until it's out of the ammunition. And then you repeat that whole process.
So a person firing that type of a weapon, after he fires it, doesn't have to cock it manually. The action of firing the first round actually brings that next round up so it's ready to fire again.
Yes, and that's why they call it a semi-automatic pistol. Because every time you pull the trigger, it's going to go through these different cycles of operation, and it's going to self-load itself.
Now let's talk about what you referred to as a cartridge, because I think that's going to become important to the jurors to understand in just a second. What a layperson might refer to as a bullet, but what you refer to as a cartridge. Can you explain how that's made up and how that reacts when it's fired in that weapon?
Certainly. The ammunition that you fire in this gun or discharge in this gun would primarily consist of a brass cartridge case. And that particular cartridge case is going to hold all the components. It's going to hold the gunpowder when the firing pin hits it. And it's also going to contain the bullet. And the bullet, of course, is the object that's going to be fired through the barrel at its target. So again, we have this cartridge case, we have the gunpowder, we have the primer, and we have the bullet. So you have those different components.
Right. And the bullet is actually the nose or the cone of a cartridge, and it's the part of the bullet that disengages and flies down the barrel toward the target. Would that be fair?
Yes, some people call it a projectile, but typically we're going to call it a bullet, and that's going to be what you fire at your target, wherever that target is.
All right. And it flies at very high velocity, is that correct?
Yes,
Too fast to see.
yes. Typically in a case like this, you're probably looking for its caliber and its type of ammunition, somewhere around 1,000 feet a second.
What's the bullet made of?
Basically, it's going to be a jacketed, a copper jacketed bullet with a lead core in the center, so it gives it some weight.
So it's lead on the inside, but it has another metallic part surrounding it, the jacket.
Yes, and that's the typical makeup of most particular bullets.
Then when that fires down the barrel, the back part of a cartridge is then grabbed and ejected out the side or the top of the firearm. Is that correct?
Yes, and again, because it's a semi-automatic handgun, it's got some parts on it, it's got something called an extractor, a little book. It's also got an ejector, so it's designed, it's produced, it's manufactured to not only discharge that cartridge, and then when that bullet's fired through the barrel, it's going to go out, then you have the remaining cartridge case. And that gun is designed to basically grab that cartridge case and eject it or throw it away from the gun, so it can pick up another live round of ammunition or another cartridge and load it back in the barrel so you can repeat that process.
And obviously that cartridge casing doesn't fly out the side or the top of that weapon nearly as fast as the bullet or projectile flies down the barrel.
Certainly.
Okay, and is there some general idea? I know you can't really tell exactly how far they fly or where they go, but what's typical in a handgun such as this and this type of ammunition that you examine?
I did not do an ejection pattern test on this gun, so I can't tell you exactly, but typically it's going to eject it rearward to the right. So maybe a few feet, it depends on how you're holding the gun. There's a lot of different factors. If you're pointing the gun one direction, it may change where the cartridge case is going to land dramatically.
Okay.
I have to take it out, put it down, but basically a few feet, usually rearward to the right.
And when you do a crime scene, if you suspect a semi-automatic handgun was used at that crime scene, one of the things you'll look for is the cartridge casings that are ejected. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They're certainly easier to find at a scene than the bullet or projectile.
They can be, depending on the crime scene.
Okay. All right, if you have a seat, thank you. I think that's going to be helpful to what we're going to be talking about. With regard to the testimony that you've just given, sir, you did test fire that .40 caliber handgun, states 8.0, correct?
Yes, I test fired it, so I would have some test fired components for comparison, as well as for some distance determination.
And you did determine it to be operable. It did work just the way it's supposed to, as you've described that for the jurors here today.
Yes, it's in like new condition. It's functioning as intended.
And in your estimation and opinion, is it in fact a deadly weapon? That is an instrument, device, or thing that's capable of causing or inflicting death?
Like any handgun, firing a modern cartridge, yes, you could say that.
Okay. Do you have State's Exhibit 23 in front of you? I believe that was the bullet jacket from the autopsy.
Yes, I do.
All right, now, as you've just explained, that jacket would have been the metallic covering on the bullet or the projectile that flew down the barrel?
Yes. State's Exhibit number 23, however, is a small fragment of that jacket
Just
material.
a very small portion of it?
Yes.
And it's not unusual when a projectile strikes something that jacket breaks or fragments or comes off and we find sometimes pieces of it.
It's very normal, yes.
Now, let me ask you this. If you have a weapon to compare it to, is it theoretically possible to find a bullet jacket, the part that covers that projectile, and test it, examine it, and to tell if it was fired in a particular weapon?
Yes, we do that examination routinely in the laboratory. It's a very common request we get. Covered bullet, can we match it back or identify it back to a specific firearm that's submitted for examination?
Now, my question was, is it theoretically possible, but can you do it in every single case?
Not every case. Sometimes the bullets are too damaged.
Okay. What are the factors in determining whether you can make such an identification?
There's a number of factors. It depends on how well the bullets, when they're fired, how well they engrave. In other words, they're being squeezed through these gun barrels. And as they get squeezed through the gun barrel, they're going to actually contact what we call rifling, or markings within the gun barrel that basically were designed to put a spin on the bullet and give the bullet stability and accuracy. But forensically, they provide us a lot of information. And so how that bullet interacts with that barrel's factor, the actual surface material of the bullet in and of itself. There's a number of factors, again, the damage, but it's not an uncommon or not, I mean, it's a routine examination for us to compare bullets to guns.
All right, and the reason I ask that, because in CSI, the local popular crime drama, they can always make an identification. In the real world, you can't, although you try. Would that be fair?
That would be fair, yes.
In this case, did you look at State's Exhibit number 23, that bullet jacket from the autopsy? Did you compare it with your test fires, and did you try to see if you could make some kind of an identification of it and tie it back to that gun, 8.0?
Yes, it's a very small fragment, what appeared to have some rifling marks on it. In my laboratory report, I basically stated that it was of limited value for examination or for comparison. So on the particular fragment in and of itself, wasn't able to do much.
Okay, just able to tell what it was?
Yes, it's a jacket fragment, that's correct.
If you could, let's turn your attention now to State's Exhibit 5E, and that's, I think, the bullet that was submitted by Cincinnati Police Department.
Yes.
And again, that's so the jurors will refresh their memory. That's the part of the cartridge that flies down the barrel, and it is aimed toward the target. Am I correct?
Yes.
As it flies down the barrel, you talked about it being marked inside the barrel. And I've heard that that's like a quarterback trying to put a spiral on a football so that it flies straight and true. Is that a good comparison?
That's a good analogy, yes. Basically, the rifling, if you look at it, it's actually going to be rotating inside of a gun barrel, or the lands and the grooves, the channels that are cut away. If you look at them, they actually appear to rotate. And the reason they do that is so when that bullet's fired through that gun barrel and they contact these rifling impressions, it's going to force the bullet to actually rotate or spin. And by spinning the bullet, you give the bullet stability and therefore accuracy. So most of your modern guns, other than shotguns, are going to have, they're going to have rifling because we want to spin the bullet to give that bullet accuracy. And then again, forensically, it gives us a lot of information.
All right, that's my next question. Is it theoretically possible for you to look at a bullet that's recovered at a crime scene or from an autopsy or whatever, and look at the markings made on that bullet and to say whether it was fired from a particular gun?
Yes, that's a routine examination in the laboratory. Oftentimes we're able to positively identify a bullet back to a specific firearm. And sometimes we can actually eliminate a bullet as having been fired from a specific firearm based on the rifling characteristics. So it's a matter of analysis, microscopic comparisons of the submitted bullet to a test-fired bullet that we would fire in the gun.
And in this case, you've indicated that you did test fires of the handgun, 8.0. Did you use the ammunition that was submitted with the handgun, that is the ammunition from Officer Tenzing?
Yes, I did.
And why do you try to use the same ammo?
I did two different examinations in this particular case. I did microscopic comparisons as well as gunshot distance determination, So I wanted to use the ammunition that was submitted.
Would that give you a better comparison of your test fires and the bullet or cartridge case that was submitted?
Yes, that would certainly give you the most ideal, I guess, comparison, basically matching what was recovered.
And in this case, when you looked at State's Exhibit 5E, the spent bullet that was found in a radio in Samuel DuBose's car, and compared it with the test fires you fired in the Sig Sauer P320 handgun, what findings did you make?
And again, it's a finding that I stated in my laboratory report, and what I found is that State's Exhibit number 5-E, or my item number 23, I was able to positively identify it as having been fired from the Sig Sauer pistol, State's Exhibit number 8-0.
So that handgun fired that bullet through its barrel.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, let's move to State's Exhibit 5D. This was the cartridge casing that was found in the vehicle and submitted to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And again, for the jurors' refreshment of them, this is the part of the cartridge that is ejected as the bullet is fired. Is it correct that when they separate, this is ejected out of the side or the top of the weapon?
It's the metallic casing, yes, that's being extracted or thrown out of the gun after it's been discharged or fired.
Now, it's not traveling down the barrel, so the barrel's not marking it. Is there a way you can look at markings on this cartridge casing that's ejected and say whether it was fired in and ejected from a particular weapon?
Yes, there's a number of markings that are placed on this cartridge case when it's discharged in a gun, and those marks can consist of firing pin impression marks and breech face marks, and you can have those extractor marks, ejector marks, chamber marks, but basically there's a variety of markings that forensically give us a lot of information, and in this particular case, I did do a comparison of this cartridge case back to the gun.
All right, and you're examining that cartridge case, the one that was submitted from inside Samuel DuBose's vehicle, I think in the backseat floorboard. You're comparing that with test fires you did from that gun using the same type of ammunition?
Yes, it's a microscopic comparison.
And what findings did you make when you made that comparison?
Again, as in the bullet, I was able to take the cartridge case and do a microscopic comparison and positively identify the cartridge case as having been discharged in State's Exhibit number 8-0, the Sig Sauer pistol.
That handgun fired and ejected, that cartridge casing State's 5D, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, now finally, let me ask if you'll look at State's Exhibit 6C and tell the jurors what that is.
Basically, it's a red cap that was submitted for examination, and it contains an area of bullet damage.
I think it's contained in a plastic bag. Could you remove that and show the jurors?
Certainly, this is the hat that I examined.
And it bears some markings on it. Louisville Cardinals, something along those lines?
Louisville, yes.
Okay. And that was submitted to you for examination?
That's correct.
Now, one of the examinations you made, you looked for some type of a defect in that hat that would indicate to you that it was a bullet hole. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you make that examination? And if so, what did you find?
Yes, I did. And I found an obvious bullet hole in the side of the cap.
When you say obvious, what things did you observe on that, at the site of that hole or defect that indicated to you was an obvious bullet hole?
Besides the hole in and of itself, there was a small area of what we perceive as lead wiping, basically a little dark, kind of grayish ring, as well as those obvious gunpowder particles that I could observe both visually and microscopically.
On the hat at the site of that defect?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is there any way you can look at that hat and seeing what you saw, you do test fires again from 8-0, the handgun, and tell how far that hat was from the barrel of the weapon when it was fired at the hat?
Yes. Again, that's a routine examination in the laboratory. And so what we're going to be doing is test firing the gun, taking those test fired targets looking at the deposits of residues and determining, basically we give an estimate. We don't typically, unless there's special circumstances, an exact distance, but rather an estimate of approximate distance, how far the barrel was away, the gun was away when it was fired.
So you make a series of test fires, getting closer or further so you can get the same pattern of those gunshot residues?
Yes, basically what we're looking for are gunpowder particles, whether burnt, partially burnt, unburnt gunpowder particles, lead, vaporous lead, kind of patterns of lead, that sort of thing. So we're looking at two different things to help us determine, generally speaking, how far the gun was away when it was fired.
And obviously, in making this distance determination, you would have to have the weapon that was suspected of firing toward that target. Would that be fair?
Yes, typically you're going to need the exact gun, similar ammunition, that sort of thing.
And you had all that in this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
In the test fires and distance determinations that you made in this case, were you able to form an opinion as to the distance this hat was from the muzzle or end of the barrel of that firearm 8.0 when it was fired at the hat?
Yes.
And what is that opinion, sir?
And it was an approximate estimate of around a foot or greater and less than 2 feet, based if you looked at, try to duplicate the residue patterns.
So approximately 1 foot, but not more than 2 feet from the hat?
Based on the powder residues, that would be consistent with my tests. That would be correct.
Okay. Judge, may I have a second, please?
Take your time.
No further questions. Thank you, sir.
Cross?
Mr. Lattyak, when you test fired that weapon, did you experience any recoil?
Certainly. It would normally recoil every time you shoot it, yes.
And can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what recoil is?
Certainly. It would be the energy. If you can imagine, when you fire this gun, and you pull the trigger, this gun's going to go off, and that slide's going to come back, and it comes back with some force. I mean, that's why you have to grip the gun typically, pretty forcefully. But it would be that energy of that slide coming back and then stopping before it returns forward to pick up a cartridge from the magazine.
And was the recoil significant enough that it threw you off balance or moved you from where you discharged the weapon?
No, but I'm typically prepared when I'm firing in the range for that.
Would you expect that someone who was familiar with that weapon and trained with it would not experience recoil that would knock them off balance?
Depending on the circumstances, if they're shooting at a range, yes, that would be correct.
Okay. Are you familiar with the term trigger pull?
Yes, I am.
What does that mean?
That's the amount of energy that you have to put or apply to this trigger of this gun in order to get it to fire, in order to get that gun to shoot.
And with reference to the Sig Sauer Model P320, do you know what the trigger pull is on that?
I actually tested that in the laboratory, and if I can refer to my notes, I believe it was testing approximately between 6.5 to 6 3/4 pounds, as you normally would in a vertical state.
And how does that compare with any other type of handgun?
It's not uncommon for a trigger pull of a semi-automatic design like this. We'll see. Well, they'll range depending on, some guns are very light, what we call light, where it's a very reduced trigger pull, and some even go up quite a bit higher than that. So I would say mid-range.
Okay. And how about you indicated that your test with the hat indicated that the muzzle of the gun was greater than 1 foot but less than 2 feet from the head of Samuel DuBose, correct?
I think I said, yes, 1 foot or greater. So you could include 1 foot. 1 foot or greater, but out to 2 feet, a little less than 2 feet.
So it was not in contact with Mr. DuBose, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And would you agree with me that an automobile can also be a deadly weapon if used in a manner in which it could inflict injury or death?
He's not a mechanic, he's a firearms examiner.
Restate the question if you can answer, and I will allow it. Go ahead.
I asked if he would agree with me that that an automobile can also, just as he testified that weapon is a deadly weapon, could an automobile be a deadly weapon?
If you're able to answer that.
Common sense would certainly tell you that, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Reader.
Sir, what is, are you familiar with the term or phrase hair trigger?
Yes.
Tell the jurors what a hair trigger is.
That's typically a trigger that either through design, through manipulation, in other words, people working on it, or even a defect, gives the trigger a very, very, very light amount of pressure that has to be applied to it before it actually fires the gun. Sometimes you can get trigger pulls to be around a pound or under. Typically, it's going to depend on the gun, but typically you see that a lot in certain revolvers.
And it's so light that you have to be careful not to fire it inadvertently, correct, when you have a hair trigger?
That'd be correct.
All right. This certainly was not a hair trigger in your estimation, is that correct?
No, it would be basically what the factory would design it
Thank
to
you,
be.
sir. That's all I have, Judge.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Is this witness released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection? Very good. Thank you, sir, for your time. You are free to leave the building. Thank you. You can leave all the evidence there, of course.